I just want to start by having you introduce yourself to this group and tell them sort of who you are, what you do. And I'd love to hear, I mean, I know the story, but I'd love to hear sort of how you got to Talkdesk and what excited you in particular about this particular role at Talkdesk.
So Crendal Kear, I've been with the company 4 months now, and it's been an exciting, very fast-paced journey. But we've done a lot of really good, exciting things. And how did I end up at Talkdesk? So it's a great story, and it ties into, I think, kind of an important lesson, at least for me in my career. So I ended up at Talkdesk primarily because of Bill Welch. And so Bill and I met at HP, I don't know, 11 or 12 years ago. And when I first met Bill, I was immediately impressed by who he was as a leader. So I supported probably 15 different executives at the time, met with Bill. I started to take him through, and I was going through a bunch of compensation analytics with him. And I started to go through it, and he goes, hold on a minute, before we get started, this is our first time meeting. I'd love to know a little bit more about you. So that was the first thing, is Bill took the time to get to know you personally. And then second of all, he was the only exec out of all 15 that asked me any questions about the data. And commissions is the biggest sales expense, so it's a pretty important topic. So loved Bill, and I thought, if I ever have the chance to work for that guy, I'm going to work for him. And so I continued to support the execs for quite a bit. And the opportunity to work for Bill opened up, and I threw my hat in the ring and, started working for Bill at HP, and he went over to Zscaler, went over there, and then he came to Talkdesk and called me about a couple of opportunities. And at first I wasn't actually interested in leaving my current role because we were still trying to do a bunch of really exciting stuff. But after talking to Bill a couple of times, and Sydney and Tiago and a bunch of other folks, I became super excited about the opportunity at Talkdesk. So I think the market opportunity at Talkdesk, the technology that we have here, and then just where we are in terms of the evolution of this business is such an exciting time. We are really at a pivotal place in terms of what we're trying to do with the company, and the market opportunity that we have ahead of us. So that became such a compelling and interesting thing. I couldn't say no. So here we are.
But you did a career switch to come here.
I did.
Right? Like, you really pivoted, and you were in a different, I mean, again, similar, obviously, skill sets that you've had, but could you talk a little bit about that, sort of the skill set that you were using? Because you were on the ops, you've been in operations, right? And now you head up the CSM organization. So talk a little bit about the kind of, what within you, I mean, that takes courage to do,
Yeah.
just be like, okay, I'm good. And so what made you think that, okay, this is, again, you've talked about Talkdesk, but talk about that kind of mindset to be able to switch careers.
Nope, it's a great question. And by the way, it's not the first time that I've done this. But yeah, so I have a 25-year history of in fairly operational roles, whether it's sales operations, customer support operations, customer success operation, PS operations, all kinds of operational positions. And when Bill put this one in front of me, at first I was caught off guard, and I'm like, no, I'm not interested at all. Like I got this operations thing down. I got my playbook. I've got my run book. Like I can do this, like come into any organization, set up a revenue operations team, hands down. And so he's like, no, I really want you to think about this. And so I was really trying to understand where Bill was going with this. And by the way, that's one of the characteristics of like a good leader, is them being able to figure out, hey, I have this business problem or this need, and who do I need to solve that? And Bill clearly saw that way before I did, by the way. So it took several conversations with me of what he was trying to do with the customer success organization and why he wanted somebody with an operations or a strong operations background in that role. And part of it is, now that I'm in the role, I really understand why he had that mindset. And if you look at it, customer success and the journey that we should take our customers through should be a very similar journey for every customer. And yes, at different segments, strategics or our enterprise are going to have, a higher touch through that journey. And then as you go into SMB and down to the smaller, you obviously can't support them in the same way. But all of it should be very methodical in the way that we approach this. The customer experience should be the same or very similar to everybody that's in that segment. And so that's where Bill was coming from of we need to make sure what we're doing is methodical and it has an operations and a cadence behind it. And so that's where, kind of coming into this, that was his mindset. And that's a lot of what I've been starting to do as I've been in the organization is what are the tools? What are the processes? What's the cadence? What are the metrics that we need to run the business? And so it's a very operational approach to that. Not to say that, it's a customer facing role. I have to be out there in front of the customers because you can't build an organization if you don't know what your customers want. You have to hear that and understand that and then bring that back into the organization. If here's what we're hearing, here's what our customers are telling us, here's what we can do better as a company.
Yep. So I'm going to circle back to something that I know is important to you because you've mentioned Bill a number of times. And I know that mentorship and having an advocate for yourself is something that is near and dear to your heart. So I would love to chat with you a little bit about that and sort of why that's not only important to you and has been important to you. Kathy Johnson used to have this, her mother used to say, you always have one hand up asking for, looking for someone to help you, and you always have one hand down pulling up someone behind you, right? And that's always stuck with me. I love that image of that. And I think you feel very similarly that look for your sponsors, look for your advocates, look for your mentors, but also do it for others. And I'd love to hear more. I know that's important to you, and I'd love to hear more about that from you.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for teeing that up, Elizabeth. So in terms of kind of the advocates and Bill, and I'll use him as an example, right? But he had the foresight to say, Crendal, you can do this job. Even though you haven't done this job before, you have all the transferable skills. And it took me several weeks to come to that conclusion because it's easy to say, oh my gosh, I've never done it. I can't do it. And that's what a lot of people do, by the way. We limit ourselves because we can't get outside our comfort zone or outside of our box or outside of what we know. And I think that's such an important thing for leaders to actually see the characteristics and the skills that people have and how you can move those into different career paths, different jobs. And I think moving people around in the company, across cross-functional teams is super important. And it happened to me early in my career. I was probably 6, maybe 7 years in my career, and the person that was running sales moved over to the customer success side of the business. And he calls me and he says, I want you to come run operations for me. And I was like, oh no, I don't know how to do that. I don't know what I'm doing. Like all of my experience is on the sales side of the business. It's all go to market. I can't do that job. He's like, Crendal, put time on my calendar. Okay, so I went over, I met with him, and he basically coached me and guided me and said, if you're going to advance your career, you need experience in various parts of the business to give you a different vector. And so that was the first time I was completely outside my comfort zone. I was terrified. I knew for sure I was going to fail. By the way, that didn't happen. In fact, it actually accelerated the business because I could go back into the go-to-market side of the house and say, hey, there's some of these things that we probably need to change in the business to make it easier downstream to support the business. I already had those relationships. I had the credibility. I knew who to contact in all of those cases. So them moving me to the the post-sales side of the business was probably one of the best moves that the company could have made.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't have that level of confidence at the time. And I didn't think I could do the job, but they clearly, leaders above me, those advocates, saw that. So to me, that's one of if you're in a leadership role, I encourage you to always think about, what moving folks around, what benefit can you get from that? And what are those skill sets that maybe are really good moving somebody into a different role or a different part of the business? So encourage as leaders to really think about that. And then you as individuals to think about as part of career planning and career development, what would be a good next step? Because I think people get in that comfort zone of here's what I know. And, the next step is into a management and a senior manager and a director and a VP. And honestly, that's not what businesses need anymore. Yes, we need people advancing. But if you look at successful companies and successful businesses, a lot of it is diversity. And it's having these skill sets. There's a book by Sheryl Sandberg called Lean In.
Oh,
And
yeah.
one of the concepts she has in the book is it's no longer climbing a corporate ladder. It's a jungle gym. You go up, you go over, you go down, you go back over, and you go up. And that's what companies need now is that cross-functional experience, because we all depend so much on each other, and handoffs across organizations and understanding, what's happening in sales and how that impacts customer success or impacts PS, impacts product, how billing impacts all of this, right? So those cross-functional moves and experience are super valuable in companies these days.
You are singing all of my songs for those of you that have worked with me and know me well. So I want to get in, you mentioned a book. So I want to talk a little bit about, obviously you continue to learn. I mean, you're not only learning sort of as you go by taking these chances and going on to other teams and learning different parts of the organization, but I want to talk a little bit about, learning that you do sort of, why is that so important to you? And how do you encourage your teams to keep, as Bill would say, get curious, keep learning? Like, how do you make room for that? And how do you encourage your teams to make room for that? Because it is so important.
It is. And again, everybody has a different way or a different approach, but I'll tell you, my calendar, which is my behaviors, drive a lot of what I do. And so I have an hour on my calendar every week. It's time that's blocked off. And it's a learning hour. And so whether that is, I go watch videos, I go read articles that get sent out from internal, from external, whatever that is, I have that 1 hour that I know I get every week of something that I need to go improve, I need to learn more about, I need to better understand. I get a whole bunch of emails that come to me. I don't always get to read those on that day, but I may throw those in a pile, and it's like, okay, I know I have my hour. I'm going to catch up on, maybe the product releases or videos that were associated with that or some of those things. But you have to make the time. Nobody else is going to make the time for you. And by the way, if you don't make the time, everybody else is going to pull your time. So you got to step back from it and figure out, how am I going to spend my time? I have that learning time on my calendar. I have networking time on my calendar every week. That one's actually every other week, but it's on my calendar to actually focus effort on networking. I put my gym time is on the calendar. It's just another obligation, meeting, appointment that, I owe to myself. And so that's the way kind of I manage. So I got to create that time to go do that. And then you got to figure out, okay, what is it that you want to learn or know more about or things like that. And then I do a lot of, I have a dog that requires a lot of walking or
Yes.
hiking. And so I do a lot of audiobooks as well. So for those in the US, Libby is like an app where you can download free books from the library as long as you have a library card. So I always have a queue of books. And so I do a lot of audiobooks as well when I'm walking the dog.
How do you, so you're hearing from an ops person, listen to how regimented her calendar is. And I am just like bowing down to you at the moment because I wish I could be that disciplined. Certainly a goal. How do you encourage your team to do the same?
Yeah,
Because
oh,
I
good question. You asked me that and
yeah,
I did not address
oh,
that part of it.
all
No,
fine.
good question. So I think, again, I think all of it is different. So I've coached my team in different ways. So part of it is understanding what people are trying to accomplish and pushing them in, whether it's, articles, whether it's special assignments, lots of different things. Go get curious. There is somebody, I see them on this Zoom meeting where we were talking about potentially a job change for them. And I said, here's all the folks I want you to go talk to and see what you learn and come back to me with that. And then let's have that conversation, right? So I think it varies. And by the way, we learned a lot. I learned a lot actually from this person that kind of did this discovery session and came back. So it was a learning opportunity for me. It was a learning opportunity for them. And so I think as leaders, you have to do things like that of like, whether it's a special assignment or just, as Bill says, go get curious about different things. I have people on my team. I think it's important to like establish what's the North Star. And then people have that opportunity to say around that North Star, what's opportunity for improvement? What can we do there? And one of the things I share with my team is you don't get what you don't ask for. So go start asking for these things. If you want to learn more about that, if you want a different opportunity, if you want to participate in these things, ask. I mean, it's really that simple. I know it is such a simple thing, but I think people hold themselves back because like a fear of, what if somebody tells me no? That's a great learning opportunity as well. We're going to face a lot of rejection in life. You
Right.
gotta figure out how to overcome the objection, right? So if somebody does say no, okay, great, but why, right? Like, so keep peeling back that onion. Is it really a no? Because by the way, customers tell me no a lot. Um, and you a lot of times can pivot that no into a maybe and then into a yes, right? So again, another opportunity to learn, grow, and get better.
Yep. Yep. Well, obviously we talked about Bill a little bit and other leaders that you've had in your life, but I'd love to hear from you sort of what are the characteristics that you look for in your leader? And my dogs are, as always, chiming into the conversation. What are that you look for in your leader, but also characteristics that you look for for leaders on your team? And are they similar or different, and why? And maybe why?
Yep. Yeah. No, I think so to me, being a leader is, yes, you can have a title as a leader, or you can establish yourself as a leader without a formal title. And so if we talk about that, like, why do people follow certain people?
Mhm.
And it's because you establish relationships with those people. You respect them, you admire them. There's something that you appreciate about them. And by the way, they share that same level of interest back to you. So we talked about Bill, and the first time I met him and I started going down the metrics, and he said, hold on a minute, I want to know about you. So that seems like a simple, small thing, but that's a really important thing, is establishing that relationship with somebody, that connection, that trust, that respect. And that is for any of us in any role, right? It's important to establish that out of the gate, because we all work together on a daily basis. It's
Mhm.
easy to jump in and just start working and not take those few minutes to like acknowledge who this other person is and what's important to them and what drives them. And you're not going to get that every time you're in a meeting, but over time you start to understand and try to develop those nuggets. And so for me, that's an important characteristic of a leader, is somebody that's compassionate, that cares about people, somebody that has a strong vision and can share that with folks. Because inevitably, we all want to achieve a goal, whether that's a goal we set for ourselves, whether that's a team goal, a company goal. Is it somebody that can set those goals and clearly lay those out to folks so then people can rally behind that goal? So I think those visionaries are really important. The compassion is really important. And then somebody that inspires and motivates. Because you can have really good leaders that have a great vision,
Mhm.
but if they're not inspiring and motivating, guess what? You are not going to charge that hill for them.
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing that is really important is that inspiration and motivation.
Mhm. And is that what you expect from your leaders as well?
Absolutely.
And how do
Absolutely.
you communicate that to them? So some of this is, Crendal, it's going to lead to my next conversation
Yeah.
because as we're sort of going into performance review time, like this is all about feedback, right? So how do you give that feedback and that mentorship, that encouragement to your leaders?
And great question. So I think part of it is you connect with whoever it is, whatever I'll call it, person A. I have a conversation with them about what's important to them, right?
Mhm.
And figuring out that piece of the puzzle and then talking about what that looks like. Because by the way, everybody's leadership style is different. And that's okay. There's not one right leadership style, but it is, what's your approach to leadership and approach to the team?
Mhm.
And so I think if you ask the leaders on my team, they'll say, I spend time understanding them and what's important to them, making sure I support that as well. And that's not just on a professional level, that's on a personal level. So there's people on my team or that have been on my team. Like the one thing that's important to them is they want to pick the kids up from school every day.
Mhm.
So A, I have to help them protect that, and B, they have to help protect that, right? Like if that's really what your non-negotiable is and it's really important, then we both have to know that and we have to align around those things. So understanding personally and professionally what is important to somebody, I think is really good. And then establishing kind of where they want to go from a career path, what their skills are, and what maybe their development areas are, and having those conversations and putting that plan in place. And then we have to each hold each other accountable to that. It's like, okay, we said we were going to do this. We said we were going to
Mhm.
make these investments. Where are we against those, right? And continuing to have that dialogue.
Yeah. So you've talked a little bit, you said, you've heard no before, you've gotten some rejections before. How do you, some advice for maybe some more junior people or even, some of our more senior people, how do you deal with disappointment, rejection professionally, perhaps some negative feedback? Um, a customer who's being particularly nasty. Like, how do you process that, not take it personally, and how do you build the resilience, for lack of one of my favorite words, to then just sort of, okay, this was this moment, move on. How can we advise people and help them do that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think the first thing is you can't take it personally, right? Which is easier said than done. I understand that. But it is, and again, the feedback can come in many different forms, but let's just say it's an angry customer, somebody's unhappy about something, and they're kind of lashing out of, you know, you guys didn't do this and you didn't do this and this is the why, this is why I'm unhappy. It's like, okay, so first of all, I've got to empathize with them because that's how they feel. I mean, regardless whether that's a customer, that's your spouse, that's a child, they feel a certain way. So it's empathizing with them and where they're coming from and trying to understand what their starting point is. Okay, how did we get here? What does it look like from their perspective? And then having a conversation of, okay, well, let me give you my perspective on some of these. And so a lot of times it is people having two different perspectives. And when you have that conversation, all of a sudden you come to an alignment. And I'll give you a real life example, by the way. This was just happened this week. Somebody came to me and they were really unhappy because somebody's LinkedIn profile wasn't updated with
Okay.
Talkdesk. And I said, okay, I understand the concern because we're in customer facing roles.
Yep.
And I said, and, like I let this person vent, explain the frustration. And I said, would you like to hear my perspective? And it caught the person off guard. And they said, yes. And I said, well, I encouraged or coached this person not to update their LinkedIn profile because there's been a pent-up demand in this specific area. And as soon as somebody sees that LinkedIn profile updated with that role, there's a whole bunch of people that are going to be reaching out to that person. And I need that person to have 3 weeks to onboard, know the product, know the company, be able to respond to that. And it's not fair to this particular person to deal with a whole barrage of external folks coming at this person when they're not enabled, when they're not onboarded. And you know what? It was, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I understand.
Yeah.
But this person came from a very different point of like, why would you not have your LinkedIn profile updated day one that you start a job?
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I did the same thing on mine. This person did not notice that clearly. But I waited about 3 or 4 weeks because I knew the same thing was going to happen with me. So as soon as somebody sees, oh, there's a new person running the customer success organization, I have a problem, I'm going to reach out to them right away. I did not want that because I wasn't prepared to deal with that influx of inquiries, issues, all of that stuff, because I need to spend a little bit of time with my team internally, just getting onboarded, understanding the product, understanding current situation. So when all of these folks reach out to me, I have a decent response. Not, oh, I got to get back to you. That's probably not going to help our cause right now.
Right. Right.
But
So
it's interesting when you like somebody's perspective and somebody else's perspective. So kind of those negative things, and we turned that into a positive, right? That was somebody giving me a lot of negative feedback about their viewpoint on something. And when they saw mine, we came to a conclusion of, yeah, that actually does make a lot of sense.
yeah.
So it
So
went
you're
away.
obviously a very strong communicator, right? And you are obviously, or it seems that way from, sort of how you're saying, and that you also have a confidence that you can push back. You can, stand your ground. How did you build that? How did you like, so again, for some of our more junior people on the call, it is sometimes scary if a leader comes at you and says, depending on who it is, right? And says, this, you need this. You didn't do this. I need that. How do you build that confidence and that communication style so you don't sound defensive, so that it is clear that you're listening to them, but that you also are able to express your point of view in a way that is appropriate? But also that Bill, Michelle, that also, I think Michelle's afraid of you, Crendal. That's clearly the issue. But that also, allows you to have that confidence and that skill set to be able to say, maybe not in those words, I think you're wrong and I need you to hear me.
Yeah. And I think that's, it's not always easy, by the way.
Right.
Let me just start with that. So it may come across as easy or it comes naturally or things like that. That's not always the case, by the way. But a lot of it is that empathy, right? Letting somebody vent, letting them get their frustration out, letting them say their piece and trying to understand where they're coming from. But then it's asking. So a lot of times, and that's what I did in this situation. Would you like my viewpoint?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? I let that person still have control because I said, would you like my viewpoint? I didn't say, I'm giving you my viewpoint. Most people are not going to say no, by the way, because then they kind of look like a jerk if they don't want to hear your side of the story. So it's an interesting way of letting them still have the control. And by the way, a lot of senior leaders, and I'm not saying at this company, I'm just saying in general, people have large egos many times that are in very senior positions and they think they have all of the answers. And so it's always navigating that where you're feeling like, or you're giving them the feeling as if they're in control. And so I think that's a great tactic. I use that a lot, of asking those questions, and kind of putting them in a position where no is like a really bad answer.
Mhm.
And so then you open it up, right? It's, would you like to hear my side? 98% of the time, they're going to say yes. And so then you now have the opportunity to express that, share a viewpoint, give them a perspective. Sometimes they'll come back and say, I still disagree. That's okay.
Yep.
Right. So we all acknowledge that. Okay, well, help me understand, because this was, the way I was thinking about it. What did I miss?
Mhm.
So for me, a lot of them, I just use this seek to understand when these things happen. And sometimes it's like, okay, well, I guess I didn't fully understand their side. Maybe they didn't fully understand my side, and we'll eventually come to conclusion. Or sometimes it's, we just agree to disagree.
Mhm. Yep. And
Um,
then how do you move on from that? How do you, because again, how do you move on when you've agreed to disagree? How have you gotten to the point where you can be like, okay, and that you don't let it, I always say middle school girl syndrome, right? That you don't let it fester, that, 2 months from now, you're gonna be like, well, you said 4 years ago that, I mean, again, I think back to, I was one of those middle school girls, right? How do you, how do you then move on from that? If you really are vehemently in disagreement, even if you've agreed to disagree, how do you, what's your mindset and your ability to say, okay, now I'm gonna move on from this.
yeah. No, and I think part of it is, what is, like, do you understand why that's the decision you made? And is it aligned with your guiding principles,
Mhm.
whether that's personal, professional, all of that? And I'll give you a situation. So in a prior life, my CEO was, one of my CEOs wanted everybody, he wanted butts in seats. So he was very much, if you weren't sitting at your desk, you probably weren't working. By the way, at that point in my life, my sister had had two kids that were born premature. And so once a month, I was flying back to Indiana to work at my sister's house. I didn't need the time off. I just needed to be there in the evenings to spend some time with my niece, because her parents were in the hospital with the two twins. And she just needed that. And I looked at that, and my family is my
Mhm.
priority. But
Right.
I had a conversation with my boss at the time, who was Bill. And I said, look, here's the situation. Here's what I'm asking for. By the way, Bill had the opportunity to say no to that, right? I said, I just need to work 1 week remote. And here's why. And he said, just pick up the phone when I call, like, get your job done.
Mhm.
Perfect. That's all I needed. But the CEO did not like that. He wanted me at my
Wow.
desk every day. And so, and again, we've had lots of conversations about it, but for me, the importance was supporting my family and my job. And I was doing both of those well. I was doing it in a different way than he liked. And so that was hard, because I
Mhm.
knew he ran the company. It's ultimately his decision of, how he wants to run it. But it was more important for me to support my family. And so I had to come to the conclusion of, whatever the outcome is, I feel really good about that outcome, because it's aligned with my priorities in life.
Mhm. Mhm.
And by the way, it wasn't easy.
Right.
Those are not easy, because you are making trade-offs between personal and professional at that point in time. But I was comfortable with that. But don't get me wrong, in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, is today the day that he's going to fire me?
Right.
It might have been.
Right.
But we navigated that scenario for about a year. And he would come to me I don't know, every other month with the same story. Um, but I was comfortable with it. I was comfortable if, I lost my job, that was okay, because I felt good about that it was important and it was aligned with my priorities in life.
Mhm.
And so that's what I would say is, as people are making decisions, what are your priorities? What is important to you from a personal and a professional perspective? And when you do that, like you have to feel good about that decision. So, somebody put you on a stage in front of thousands of people and you describe that scenario. Do you feel good about that?
Mhm. We have about 10 minutes left.
Yep.
So Christina, are there any other questions? Because otherwise I'll just keep going.
I'm surprised nobody's making comments or has questions.
Other than Michelle, which again, that was for personal gain. Uh, so I'll just keep going. So one of my questions for you is you just brought up, some work-life balance issues, some values that are important to you. So how do you, if you don't mind, what are some of your other, oh, thank you, Mimi. What are some of your other values? What are some of the other things outside of work that are really important to you, that you live by, that you make sure you make time for? I mean, you brought up your dog. So what are some other things that sort of make you who you are?
Yep. And you heard a little bit about like family is a super important thing to me. And so prioritizing that, I think is always important. And you got to figure out what that looks like, because that looks very different for many people, right? So for me, it was that ability to fly back once a week and support my sister and her family. For others, it may be I want to drop the kids off every day at school or pick them up every day at school, or I don't want to miss, a big school performance or, activity at school. So I think those things are all like, what is that non-negotiable? And you really got to hold that non-negotiable close, because guess what? People are going to pull at those non-negotiables
Yeah.
all the time.
Yes.
All the time. And by the way, you can't have 10 non-negotiables. You can have one, maybe two. And so that's the thing, is like really honing in on what is that non-negotiable. And for me, again, that family thing takes a different form depending on what it is, but there's certain things where it's like, no, family first. I got to prioritize this over some other things. But the one that's super important to me on a daily basis, 5 days a week, I like to go to the gym. I
Yeah.
like to work out.
Well, you've got a history of this. Yes. This is
I
something that's
I do. And there's another funny story about this. I was interviewing. So when I had the opportunity to work for Bill the first time, it was a panel interview. I think there were 6 or 7 people on this panel. It was in person, back when we did everything in person. And I knew the person that was in the job before I got that one. And I said, I'll work really hard, but there's 1 hour out of every day you'll never get. And everybody like sits back in their chair. And I said, I'm going to the gym. And everybody's like kind of chuckles about it, right? So after the interview, Bill goes, yeah, I'm going to see how that works out for you. And I said, oh, please do. And so it was this funny dialogue between Bill and I, because he would call me. And at the time, it was roughly somewhere between 5:30 and 6:30. I was usually at the gym. It might be 6 to 7, 5:30 to 6:30, somewhere in that. I would never pick up my phone. Like when I said it was a non-negotiable, I meant a non-negotiable. And so Bill finally got to the point, he goes, you're probably at the gym. Can you call me when you're done? But like I had to train him.
right. Right. Right.
And so I think those are like, again, important things. Like, what is your non-negotiable? And obviously it can't be, 4 hours, but you can take an hour and go do something.
Yeah. So tell people sort of why is you have, I mean, were you a bodybuilder? Were you a weight, like what, there's more to this story than just you going to the gym, I think.
Oh, Elizabeth, there's so many fun. So yeah, so I got into bodybuilding. But again, I got into bodybuilding because of my career, which people are going to find like, how do those two connect? Because they are completely opposite. So I have a fear of public speaking. I hated it. I still do not love it. And so
Never know, Crendal. You'd never know.
so being on stage in front of a lot of people is very uncomfortable for me. And so I was like, okay, how do I like what's like the worst possible scenario you could put yourself in front of a whole bunch of people? And so literally I was like, probably being on a stage in a bikini, like that's the worst thing that you could possibly do. So
Yes. Yes. I think all the women, can we have an amen, right?
yeah.
Like, yeah.
And so I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a bodybuilding competition. By the way, Elizabeth, I had never been to one. I did not really know what it
Love
was
this.
like. I had no idea. Like, but I just decided that was outside my comfort zone. I was going to learn something new, and it would hopefully help me overcome my fear of public speaking. Because if I could get on stage in a bikini in front of a whole bunch of people, being fully dressed should be a piece of cake.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, so that is how I got into bodybuilding, was to overcome my fear of public speaking. Um,
Yeah.
and so and I'll tell you, I did my first show and I presented terrible, by the way. Like I was super stiff on stage. I was super uncomfortable, like all of those things. And so I was disappointed in myself. So I went back to my coach and I said, okay, I got to do another show because I got to redeem myself. Like I know I can do better. I did not do great. And it was my confidence. And that's
Yeah.
what bodybuilding taught me is, I prepared really well. I followed my diet. I did my training plan. Like I had a really, really good package, but I didn't present well. And so when you're, you know, like having a professional presentation, you could have the best content, you could have prepared really well, but if you're not on stage with confidence and presenting, your
Mm-hmm.
audience is not going to be bought into that. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what bodybuilding taught me about presenting. And so I encourage people to, do these things that are way outside your comfort zone because you're going to learn a lot. Just again, it was definitely an interesting experience. I learned a lot both about myself, about bodybuilding, about presenting. So yeah.
That is, I did not see that turn coming. I knew someone ratted you out, so I knew like that this was in your background, but to tie it, I mean, what a lesson to give people. Like, and Crendal, you took it to an extreme. Like, I don't like speaking on stage, so I'll go stand in a bikini on stage, but I'll also spend like hours like with diet and with all of that. And obviously, this is obviously, exercise has clearly, been part of who you are
Yep.
always,
Yeah.
but what a wonderful lesson to give people, like get outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Um, that is where the learning starts.
It does. And it's being outside that comfort zone is you're going to challenge yourself, skills, like it's going to help build your confidence, all
Yep.
of that, right? Like I can't encourage folks enough because you're going to be put in situations here at Talkdesk, in your personal life, like embrace being uncomfortable, get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and taking this role was uncomfortable for me because I haven't, there's no title or background that says I ran a customer success organization. So how uncomfortable coming into
Mm-hmm.
Talkdesk, which by the way is a new industry for me as well. I've been in data storage, I've been in software, I've done cyber. And again, those are all industry changes. So I can clearly learn a new industry. And then taking on an organization that I haven't ran a customer success organization. And so it's uncomfortable. And I think that's the beauty of this is I didn't come in pretending that I ran a customer success
Right.
organization. I have
Right.
been very vocal about I haven't, but here's what I'm good at. And I've asked my team, they will all tell you, like, you guys have to help me. I haven't done the customer success job. Yes, I have shadowed, I know a lot about it, but I actually haven't done that specific job. And so they have to help me. They're my eyes into what that job entails and what I need to know about that job to help guide and lead the team.
Mm-hmm.
But then we also talk about here's the value that I can provide based
Mm-hmm.
on my skill set and my experience, right? And both of those have to come together to build a really good team.
Yep. Yep. This has been amazing. I say this after everyone, but I cannot thank you enough because I also know how busy you are. And this, I think everybody on this call The lessons that came out of this call, I think for all of us, and not only about taking risks, taking chances, work on yourself, work on your growth, set time for you. I mean, Crendal, you covered it all, like all of the things that we as adults, right, need.
And we all know this, right? Like
Exactly.
it's not like I'm sharing something today that nobody knows. It's we all know it, but we all get like complacent in our jobs and what we're doing every day. And so I think things like this are just good reminders of,
Yes.
wait a minute, am I really, making the right choices? Am I really spending my time in the right ways? Am I really thinking through these things and stepping back from the chaos of our daily jobs and taking the time to, whether it's schedule, whether it's knowing what your non-negotiable is, scheduling that into the calendar, into your time, making sure, you are getting out of your comfort zone and challenging yourself. And if you're not, go figure out what that is and do that, right? Like just like move on these things because we get so caught up in our daily job and what we have to get done. I think we lose sight of some of these things that we all know. We all know them.
We do. Well, first of all, I can't thank you enough for joining me and all of us today, but also thank you for all of the reminders, right? And we all can hold each other accountable also for those reminders, right?
Yeah.
And that to remind each other, to do all of this and to put all of this in the forefront of our mind and to practice it, right? Crendal, like it takes discipline to get yourself that hour to do your learning. It takes some discipline. It's like a muscle memory, right? But you've got to do it because as Crendal says, this is what has made her who she is and what makes her successful. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. And I want to do a little shout out to the customer success team. I see a bunch of you on this, so huge shout out to my amazing team.
I agree. Thank you, everybody. I hope you learned something fun today and took some good lessons away. And Crendal, thank you, thank you, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.